Greetings. So I've done a few videos before on modern day slavery, and I came across this video of the former Prime Minister of the UK, Theresa May, speaking on Al Jazeera about the global modern day slavery. So I wanted to bring it to you, to my audience, so that you can see or hear some of the things they talk about. So join me in watching the former Prime Minister of the UK, Theresa May, speaking on Al Jazeera about modern day slavery.
Theresa May, the former British Prime Minister, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. Now, you are now the chair of the Global Commission for Modern Slavery and Human Trafficking. Can I start by asking you to explain to us the scale of that problem?
Well, certainly, James, and thank you for asking that question, because one of the problems with modern slavery and human trafficking is that we say it's hidden in plain sight. But in fact, 50 million people, and that may be an underestimate, 50 million people at least around the world are in slavery and or have been trafficked. And this is important because many people would think that slavery had been finished many years ago, centuries ago, but it's happening today in every single country. And my Global Commission has come together. We've produced a report, the title of which is No Country is Immune, because this is something that is taking place in every country around the world. And we have an urgent need for action. 50 million people in slavery around the world is a moral stain on our humanity.
Doing this work, you and your fellow commissioners must have heard some pretty appalling stories.
We have, and we have two survivors on our commission, as well as politicians, business leaders, people who lead NGOs, academics. We've all come together. I think it's the first time this sort of group has come together. And we've also had a panel of people with lived experience who have been working with us as well to make sure that the voice of survivors, the voice of those who have been victims but who are able today to talk about what they have been through, has been able to inform us. And that has helped us as we've come to the key recommendations that we have in our report.
Now, this issue is not a new one to you. Our viewers will remember that you were the UK Prime Minister for 3 years. You were also the UK Home Secretary, the Interior Minister, I think the longest serving in modern history in that role. And in both of those jobs, you, I know, addressed this issue. And in fact, as Prime Minister, you got the first Modern Slavery Act passed in the UK. Why has this issue become so important to you?
Well, I suppose I first started looking at this issue because of the aspect that the majority of people who are in slavery are women and girls. And I've done some work in my political career on issues of violence and abuse against women. And the issue of human trafficking and then modern slavery came out of that. And I suppose my eyes were opened at one stage to the fact that this is not something that we can talk about in the past. This is not something that is only happening in a few countries of the world, as some people might imagine. It is everywhere. It is in our towns, our cities, our villages. It is, I think, the greatest human rights issue of our time.
Now, I read your report, and before reading your report, I wanted to just do a little bit of research on who actually leads on this issue in the international system. And I found out that it's a responsibility of the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, the International Labour Organization, the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, the UNHCR, the Refugee Organization, the International Organization for Migration. There is also a special rapporteur appointed by the UN Human Rights Council and an interagency coordination group which has 17 different international bodies and parts of the UN as a member. I mean, do you not need one body dealing with this? Is that one of your recommendations? Should, for example, the UN Secretary General set up a new agency or appoint a special envoy?
Well, one of the things that we are asking the United Nations to do, certainly, is to set a single legal definition of modern slavery and human trafficking, which can help governments around the world in their domestic legislation. But you're right, there are a number of agencies of the United Nations that are involved in this. The UN Office for Drugs and Crime Particularly important because they have the responsibility of something called the Palermo Protocol, which is 25 years old now, was drawn up very much to look at issues of the trafficking of women and girls particularly. And one of the recommendations we make is that the UN should look at revitalising that, strengthening that Palermo Protocol, because a number of countries around the world have based their domestic legislation about slavery on that Palermo Protocol. But one of the other things we want the United Nations to do is to be clear that every country should have legislation outlawing slavery. And sadly, there are something like 90 countries in the world that don't have laws outlawing slavery, despite the fact that it is absolutely clear in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is what the United Nations are based on, that slavery and the slave trade should be outlawed.
Why did you not decide, though, to have one particular body to lead this, or say that one of those long list of bodies should take the lead on this? And if you don't think there should be one particular person or body, what new mechanisms do you want to put in place?
Well, one of the reasons is you talk about possibly setting up a whole new agency. Believe you me, that would take a very long time and mean that the eye will be taken off the ball of taking action today to deal with the issue. So this isn't about setting up another group, another agency. It's about saying to the UN and saying to individual governments, and in fact we have recommendations for businesses, we have recommendations for civil society organisations when they're operating in crisis contexts as well. What we're saying is the time for talking is, we've had a lot of talk, we want action.
True, man.
And certainly we wouldn't get action if we were saying, well, we need to set up an entirely new agency before we can do anything. Governments, the United Nations, businesses, civil society organisations, people themselves, all of us have a role to play in this, and all of us can act now, and that's what we want to see.
As you say, this is a global problem. There are so many different countries, so many different cases, so many different circumstances. In fact, I was looking at the recent cases in your own country, the UK. You've got cases of sexual exploitation, you've got sweatshop labour workers, slavery in the shipping industry, and a recent conviction of a Ugandan judge who'd been serving as a UN criminal tribunal judge who was living in the UK and had bought a young Ugandan female as a slave to live with her in the UK. All awful cases, but this issue, there are so many different types of cases. It's not one size fits all, is it?
No, it isn't. There are many different types of cases. So there are the sexual exploitation, as you've mentioned, domestic servitude, forced labour in business supply chains. This is a big issue. We have key recommendations in this area that government should mandate businesses to act, to investigate their supply chains and their own operations to see if there is forced labour, and then act to remediate that, to stop that from taking place and prevent it from happening in the future. So these are important aspects. This is not a one-issue thing, in a sense. There are many different aspects to modern slavery and human trafficking. So that's why we need everybody to act. This can't be solved by one group. Governments can't solve it on their own. Businesses can't solve it on their own. Civil society can't solve it on its own. We all have to work together. And that's one of the points of having launched the report at the United Nations, showing that this is something that affects every country in the world. No country is immune, and we need to work together to end modern slavery and human trafficking.
Isn't one of the problems the fact that this issue of modern slavery is very closely tied with migration? And as you know, probably better than many politicians around the world, that is one of the most toxic political issues, because of course in your own country you had to deal with the aftermath of the Brexit referendum in 2016, and I think most would agree that one of the reasons that some of the people voted for Brexit was migration. How do you get people to care about the victims when some of the discourse about migrants is so hostile, abusive and perhaps frankly racist?
Well, it is important that when people are talking about the issue of migration, they think about it carefully and they understand what lies behind it. And migration and displacement of people is an example of one of the themes we bring out in the report, which is that modern slavery and human trafficking can't be dealt with as issues simply in isolation. They are interconnected. So we have to look at all of these issues together. If you just think of the picture, climate change can increase the displacement of people. It's reckoned that by 2050, something like 200 million people will have been displaced as a result of climate change. That increases people's vulnerability to being trafficked, their vulnerability to be taken into slavery. Dealing with these issues together means that we can make sure that we're dealing with slavery and trafficking as well as dealing with issues like climate change.
And dealing with these issues together, your report was unveiled at the UN General Assembly, and this issue is one of the goals in the Sustainable Development Goals. These are all things that need to be done through that sort of work. Multilateralism, as it's known, countries of the world collaborating and working together for the common good. The problem with that is it seems to be completely under threat, is it not?
Well, I think we are seeing challenges to the multilateral institutions around the world. That is certainly the case. But my message to governments and to people around the world is that this modern slavery and human trafficking is the greatest human rights issue of our time. With 50 million people at least around the world in slavery, this is something we cannot ignore. We cannot turn a blind eye to this. We must ensure that we are acting, and we will only deal with this, we'll only achieve that Sustainable Development Goal target of eradicating modern slavery and human trafficking if we work together.
There is an important anniversary this year. It is the 80th anniversary of World War II and the founding of the United Nations and what many have called the rules-based international order. Do you fear that that order is now collapsing?
Well, there are certainly challenges, as I say, both to multilateral institutions and to the rules-based international order. But I think that if you look back, as you say, the United Nations was founded after the Second World War, and there was that sense of the importance of countries coming together to debate issues, working together on key challenges that governments were facing around the world. And it seems to me that if you want an issue to work together on, then actually taking people out of slavery, ensuring that human beings have their freedom, that they're not being treated as commodities, bought and sold by organised criminal gangs for their profit, or being forced into labour to increase the profit of a company, for example. If we want to work together on anything, let's work together on this issue, which is a moral stain on our humanity.
Underpinning the international system of the last 80 years is clearly the law. First, you have the UN Charter, and that was clearly broken by Russia in 2022 when it invaded another country, Ukraine. You have other laws, the Geneva Conventions, international humanitarian law, yet Israel seems to be ignoring both of those in Gaza. It's ignoring some of the rulings of the highest court of the UN system, the International Court of Justice. Do you fear international law is being ripped up?
There have certainly been challenges to international law, but actually one of the aspects of interest at the moment is the fact that the International Criminal Court has recently issued a policy statement about how it will look at issues and allegations of slavery that are undertaken by states. So I think there is a system there that can help us in dealing with this issue. But you're right that what it underpins and what should underpin our operations is a respect for the rule of law. Some of the recommendations we made in our report are about legislation. They're about laws in countries. They're saying to countries, you should have laws that actually make it clear that there is a penalty for slavery and slave trade, that you should outlaw slavery and the slave trade. But when you're setting your domestic legislation, you need to do it in a way that covers looking at issues around businesses and their supply chains, mandating them to take action so there is no forced labour in their operations and their supply chains. It means ensuring the legislation is there that provides support for victims, that looks at the powers of law enforcement, the interaction with other criminal and civil law, public procurement, the way governments buy products to make sure that there is no forced labour in the production of those things. All of these are important to be in domestic legislation. So you talk about international law, but actually we also need to make sure that countries are getting their domestic legislation right on this issue.
I get that point about domestic legislation, but you also referred to the International Criminal Court, and that is a court that's under a great deal of challenge, is it not? There's an arrest warrant for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued by the prosecutor Karim Khan, yet Hungary and now Belgium say they won't arrest him, and the US administration has got sanctions out against prosecutor Khan and his team. How worried are you about the future of the International Criminal Court, and what should other countries who are signatories to the Rome Statute, that's the treaty that created the court, what should they now do?
Well, I think all countries who are signatories will have respected and recognised the importance of the international.
Let me just break here for a minute. I just want to input here by saying laws and international laws is only enforced the way I see it when other countries, not the Western countries, violate it, like Africa and some other countries. But when international law call out Western countries, example US and Israel, then I believe the law is no longer abide. So we will see what happens with this international court, international law. Let's carry on and listen.
Well, that's why they have signed up to that statute. But of course, not all countries around the world have done so. But when we're looking at the issue of modern slavery and human trafficking, I think there is much that we can do in terms of domestic legislation, but there is also work for the United Nations. That's what we recommended in our report. Work for the United Nations in looking at a single legal definition of modern slavery and human trafficking, to make it easier for those who are legislating domestically, but also to make cooperation between countries in catching the criminal gangs, in catching the perpetrators, flow more smoothly and make that job easier as well.
Talking about the international system being under threat, another key part of the international system for the last 80 years is the global financial system, very much set up by the United States. In fact, the institutions are known as the Bretton Woods institutions, named after Bretton Woods in New Hampshire, a system built by the US and built on free trade. The problem is that the current occupant of the White House doesn't seem to believe in free trade.
Well, the United Kingdom's always been a country that believes in free trade, and we have to see how the current changes in relation to trading around the world are going to pan out. But in terms of slavery and human trafficking, what is important is that as we see countries trading around the world, as we see products being produced in one country and then sold in another, the consumers in that country understand what lies behind the work that has gone into that particular product. And sadly, what we know today is that consumers will be buying products that are the result of forced labour, that are a result of slavery, but they don't know about it. And we're encouraging businesses to make sure that they can clear that forced labour out of their supply chains, that they take action both to investigate their supply chains and then to take action to ensure that that forced labour is no longer there. This is an important element. And also I think consumers need to be educated. Consumers need to perhaps ask some questions about the products that they're actually buying
True.
and how those products have been produced, so that we get much greater transparency around the world as to what is actually going on.
When it comes to the current financial turmoil around the world, I've seen some commentators saying that what has been done is the greatest act of economic self-harm in modern history. And I remember that being said back in 2016 too, and that some are comparing what has happened recently with Brexit, when your country left the European Union. Of course, that ended free trade with 27 countries. How would you, with your experience of this, how would you compare?
Good question.
Well, I'm not sure that the two can be compared in that way. And of course, one of the things that resulted from Brexit, although I campaigned to remain, but then as Prime Minister vowed to deliver Brexit and to deliver it on a deal with the European Union that would make our trading relations as easy as possible, given that we were no longer a member of the European Union. But of course it has meant that the UK is in a position to negotiate its own trade deals. For example, its membership working with the countries in the CPTPP to be part of that trade bloc. So that is an opportunity that the UK is continuing to work on.
It's all about negotiation then, and clearly this is negotiating with the current occupant of the White House, who has served before in that job, and you dealt with him then. Would you give any advice to world leaders on how to negotiate with President Trump? Your successor, Keir Starmer, seems to be using flattery. He has invited Trump for a second state visit. You were the Prime Minister when he had the first state visit to the UK. Others are saying, no, bullies only understand force. What's your advice?
Well, my advice is that the relationship of any country with the United States, the relationships will vary. The UK has a long-standing special relationship with the United States, but that isn't just about who's president or who's prime minister. It's about the shared interests that we have, the shared interests in democracy, the way in which we have stood together over the years, fighting for that democracy, upholding that value around the world. So it's about understanding the different issues of different countries. It's about understanding and respecting one another and knowing when there is a particular national interest that you have to be very clear about. It's as with any negotiation, with any conversation between world leaders.
But of course, the man who's probably got the toughest job of anyone in the world in terms of negotiation is President Zelensky right now. You saw how he was treated in the Oval Office. He's been called a dictator. He was told you should never have started it. And he's being pressurized to sign a minerals deal with the US. All the pressure on the country that was invaded, not on the invader. What's your reaction to the way Ukraine is being treated right now?
Well, I think what is important is the way in which Europe and America came together to support Ukraine when we saw Putin's further invasion of Ukraine back in 22. That was very important. That is holding, and I think it is important that it does. As you know, countries around Europe are looking to increase their spending on defence and continuing their support for Ukraine. What we want to see, we all want to see, a long-lasting peace. We all want to see the fighting stopped. But actually what we need to see is a peace that is right for the people of Ukraine.
You talk about the countries coming together to support Ukraine, but President Trump has described President Putin as savvy and highly respected. I mean, you were the UK Prime Minister when there was an attack using a nerve agent, Novichok, on the city of Salisbury in 2018, which the UK authorities quickly concluded was carried out by Russia. How does it make you feel when you hear praise for President Putin or the suggestion that it's time to bring Russia back into the international club?
Well, the UK, as you say, has particular experience of Russia with the use of that chemical weapon on the streets of one of our cities, and sadly, as a result of that, a British citizen lost her life, Dawn Sturgis. But if we just look at the reaction to that, I was able to work with others around the world, including President Trump, to ensure that we deported Russian intelligence officers. And if you look at the numbers, the largest number of Russian intelligence officers who were forced out of a country were from the United States, and that was under President Trump.
Yes, but some are saying President Trump, the second time around, does not have the same people around him. You wrote of your time in his first term, with Donald Trump, I never knew what to expect. And you described walking out in the White House to face the press, not knowing if he was going to back NATO or not. He ended up backing NATO at that news conference. Others, though, have described Trump's first term as a near-death experience for NATO. Given what's happened with tariffs and the fact he doesn't have the same advisors around him, are you worried about the future of NATO now and the fact there seems to be a realignment of global politics with President Trump looking much more favourably on Russia?
Well, I think what we've seen so far is a commitment from the United States to NATO. President Trump in his first administration, when he was first president, made the point and has continued to make the point, and the UK supported this, that countries in NATO should have been increasing their defence spending. The United Kingdom had always spent at the 2% of GDP level that was required of NATO membership. Many other countries hadn't. President Trump was very clear about the need for countries to step up to the plate and do that, and many more countries now do so. Of course, now we're looking at increasing that spend further. But as I say, President Trump was right to bring that to people's attention. We supported that, and he supported NATO previously, and we've seen so far that America has continued to support NATO.
Of course, now he wants it to be 5%, not 2%. Given everything that's going on in the world, and it clearly is a very challenging time, with your experience as a former leader of a G7 country, how worried are you?
Well, we live in unpredictable times. I think what we've seen in recent years with the financial crash in 2008, with the impact, obviously, of the pandemic, with Russia's further invasion of Ukraine, and the impact that's had, for example, on energy prices and economies in Europe, we have seen that greater unpredictability in what we see around the world. But any world leader has to look both at the interests of their own country, critically at the interests of their own country, do the right thing for the national interest, but also be aware of the impact of their decisions around the world and work with others on issues where it is through that work together that action can be taken and an impact can be felt. And the issue of modern slavery and human trafficking, the report that the Global Commission I chair has produced is very clear about the need for countries around the world to work to make sure that we eradicate what is a moral stain on our humanity.
Into the thing, people are not subscribed. Please subscribe. And the subscription